Hello, everyone. Good morning. We hope you're doing good today. Yes, you are. It's Friday. Welcome to the second day of our Nerdio Bootcamp. Today we will have the technical session with Christopher Jones. He is Nerdio pre-sales engineer and he will be our speaker. He's a key person to ask any technical question from Nerdio for Azure or Nerdio for WVD. My name is Marlene Novo, and I'm in charge of the deployment and positioning of Nerdio at Intcomex for Latin America and the Caribbean. Please feel free to ask any question you may have, and we will answer at the end of the session. So welcome, Christopher.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you here today for the second day. And like she mentioned, my presentation is going to be a little bit more technical. So what we're going to do is we'll start out. I'm going to give a little bit of a recap, and I'm going to walk us through kind of the entire journey that you as a partner might go through when you are presented with a new client opportunity, you quote out and price that opportunity, and then you bring it from the deployment phase all the way through to the provisioning process, configuration, and then final implementation. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a recap and kind of just a reminder. Our mission here at Nerdio is to empower MSPs to build successful cloud practices in Microsoft Azure. So our whole goal is to empower you and equip you guys with the tools necessary to be successful in this new age of cloud. So with that, this slide here is kind of the agenda for today, if you will, right? So what we're going to do is you can see from the beginning there, this slide represents, again, the entire life cycle of an opportunity, right? So you can see kind of where Nerdio plugs into the different phases. And so what I'm going to do right now is we'll go through each one of these, we'll talk about it, and then we'll go through an actual demo. I'm going to share out my screen and we'll walk through each one of these in detail. So phase one there, the assessment phase, has to do with gathering information about the current opportunity, right? So this is where you would meet with the client initially, you ask them what their on-prem infrastructure looks like, how many users, what type of servers, what type of licensing do they have, right? It's more of an information gathering phase. Once you understand kind of the parameters or the full details of the environment, you move over to the pricing phase, right? This is where you say, all right, we need to get a pretty good understanding of what this environment will look like fully deployed in Azure. So that's where Nerdio comes in, right? You would leverage our cost estimator. You're going to plug in the details of the opportunity that you're assessing, and what it's going to do is populate with the price. You then bring that to your client. You both agree. Maybe you make some fine-tuning changes or adjustments. But once the price is agreed on, then you go to the deployment phase. And that phase, Nerdio helps with as well. And we go through our provisioning process. We deploy a brand new environment, and we'll also go through that step, and I'll show you guys exactly what that looks like. And then from there, you go to the extending and the migration phase. And so both of those are you can either use Nerdio or Azure directly, or you can kind of use a little bit of both. So what that looks like is, extending is things like connecting the client's existing O365 tenant, connecting to their current Azure subscription, and then the migration phase. There's really two ways you can go about this, and I'll give you an overview now, and then we'll look at it in a little bit more detail later on. But you can either migrate existing servers and infrastructure into the cloud kind of as is. And what that looks like is it's more of a kind of a lift and shift. So you'd use something like maybe the Azure Migrate tool or Azure Site Recovery to take either an on-prem server or an existing cloud server, basically pick that server up and place it in the Azure/Nerdio environment as is, right? And that can be great because there's minimal configuration necessary. You're basically taking a snapshot of an existing server, you're replicating that into the cloud, and there's not as much legwork, right? And so that would be something that you'd leverage the Azure backend tools directly for. The other option is maybe the on-prem server's end of life. It's currently on a dated OS system, maybe something like, Server 2008 R2. and you say, we need the actual data and information from this server. However, we don't actually want to go through the process of picking the server up and moving it. We want to build fresh and clean in Azure. And so if you choose that for your migration path, you use one of our tools called the data mirroring tool, and you'll actually connect to the on-prem or the existing cloud environment with a site-to-site VPN connection, and then you data mirror specific files and folders into the cloud on a brand new server that was built in Azure. And so if you chose that migration path, you'd actually use Nerdio. So, you'd move the on-prem infrastructure into the cloud using either the Azure Direct or the Nerdio. And then once everything is built in the cloud, then we move to the next phase, right? Which is the optimization phase. This is where you are resizing virtual machines, you are adding additional storage, you are adjusting auto scale settings, and you're really kind of fine tuning and configuring the environment to really be sized correctly and to provide a great end user experience, right? And I think we all understand that the end user experience is king, right? The first week or maybe two inside the new environment either makes or breaks the solution in the eyes of the end user and the client. And so, the sizing and the optimizing piece of this is really important. And we'll go into that a little bit later on, but that's kind of the next phase. And then finally, from a Nerdio perspective, the management piece, right? Nerdio has a lot of value when it comes to the initial deployment and then the subsequent optimization and correct sizing. But finally, the management piece, let's say a user is leaving the company, or, something like with COVID, you have 20 users who are on furlough, and the client wants to release those users, but they don't want to lose all the data and they want to potentially bring them back later, right? But we all understand Azure charges based on resource consumption. And as a result, most clients want the ability to have kind of a flexible environment, right? They want to maybe furlough 20 users, archive their users. They don't want to have to pay for the resources, but they want to be able to bring those users back in maybe a day's notice, right? And with the Nerdio management piece, you have that option. You can archive subsets of users, you can scale in the environment, you can remove resources, you can resize the environments in a matter of, a few minutes to maybe an hour. And then when the environment needs to be, scaled back out, the users are coming back, maybe you're doing password resets and things, the Nerdio management piece gives you the flexibility to have a strong cloud practice and do those subsequent management pieces without much complication. So that's kind of from the assess all the way to the management piece. That's where, you're involved directly and we're involved directly with you. And then the final billing piece, that's something that you would work directly with Intcomex for, right? So that's going to be, for Azure, invoicing, maybe the Office licensing, things like that. And it's important to know that Nerdio does not sell any of the licensing for Office, for Azure, no SQL licensing, and we never will, right? We're a software company and we're happy in our space. So from the billing standpoint, that's something, again, that you'd work directly with Intcomex for. So this is kind of, again, the agenda of what we're going to discuss today and the different steps we're going to go through. So with that, I'm going to switch screens here and share out my other screen. So just bear with me here. Doing a quick switch, and you should see this come up in just a second. All right, perfect. So what you guys are looking at right now is a look directly into the Nerdio backend. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, you probably saw this from Pete's presentation. And I'm going to go through the cost estimator again in a little more detail. So the beginning of this again will be a bit of recap, but I think it'll be valuable for everybody. So again, what you're looking at here, just to kind of give you guys an overview, these are representations of autonomous client accounts, right? So maybe this is a law firm, maybe this is a dental practice, an accounting firm, right? From an Azure and an Office standpoint, all of these clients are totally autonomous, right? So they have separate Azure subscriptions, separate Office tenants, and in a regular environment, you'd have to jump to multiple portals to manage these different accounts. But through Nerdio, when you deploy, the Nerdio admin portal gives you one seamless admin portal where you can actually manage all of your accounts. So just to make sure you guys are aware of what you're looking at, these would be representations of different client accounts, right? And so in your Nerdio admin portal, to go to the billing side of things, or the cost estimation side, you'd select billing, NFA cost estimator, and we'll go ahead and kind of estimate a deployment. Now, Something I will mention on this, the estimation that I'm going to produce right now is going to be fairly robust. So, if you look at this and say, hey, that looks kind of expensive, the reason is because, I'm pricing at an environment that has, multiple servers, very robust resources. I'm going to stick with 50 users in this case. And this would be kind of ideal for a client that, isn't necessarily as price sensitive. Once we get to the end, I'm going to walk you through a few of the gears and the mechanics that can be adjusted to help reduce the price. But initially, I'm going to just kind of produce a pretty robust quote at the end. So I'm going to go through and quote this, and I'll walk you guys through exactly what I'm doing. So first off, we have the user count, right? And so, this is obviously pretty flexible, but the thing to keep in mind is this user count is not the total user count for the entire environment, right? Nerdio and really Azure, we build based on dedicated desktop or pooled desktop users. So there might be 200 users in a given environment, but if only 50 of those users are actually going to be assigned WVD resources, then those are the users that we actually care about, right? So, if you see this number and you say, well, they have, maybe 200 total users in the environment, that's actually not what we care about. We want to know how many users are going to be assigned physical WVD resources, and in this case, we're going to say that it is 50. Then you would select what path you're going to go with. Are you going to go with a WVD deployment, or are you going to stick with the classic RDS deployment, right? And we have had a lot of conversation around WVD. Windows Virtual Desktop is really kind of the latest and greatest. It's new. It's what Microsoft is pushing and most people are pushing. But there are situations where we've seen partners want to stay with RDS, and there's really two reasons. The first reason is the client has a line of business application or some existing software that was developed specifically for maybe server 2016 or server 2012, and it would take a lot of internal resources to actually develop that out for a Windows 10 native environment. And so in that case, we see partners say, what, it would cost too much for us to try to push this client to WVD. Let's go with the classic RDS environment. The other option is just familiarity, right? Most partners say, what, WVD, and this was more so probably closer to the beginning of this year, but they would say WVD is kind of new. It hasn't been tested as much as maybe like a legacy solution like RDS. So we're going to stay with RDS until WVD has been kind of vetted a little more. At this point, we see the vast majority of our partners come on. They're excited about WVD. It's generally less expensive because there's less physical resources required to operate it. And so they go ahead and move forward with WVD. So for this demonstration, I'm going to also stick with the WVD route here. The next thing here is the dedicated desktops, kind of like Pete mentioned yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and place 5 dedicated desktops here, just for the sake of providing more of a dynamic price calculator here and kind of a more of a dynamic solution for this potential end client, right? The next section here, when it comes to users per CPU, I would recommend just leave this to professional worker by default unless you have a pretty good understanding of the type of end user you're dealing with. And just to kind of break down what exactly we're saying here, we're asking you how many users can you place on a given virtual core of one of these machines, right? So we can see down here in this pool, right? So these 45 users right here, we are saying that there are 4 core per session host in this environment, right? So what we're saying with this calculation here is we can place 3 users on each one of these core, right? So what we're saying is we can have 16 users on an E4 SV3, and then you divide that by 45, and the calculator is going to give you the total number of session hosts here, which is 4. So if I said, hey, actually, we want to put, maybe 4 users on, you'll see this automatic adjustment made. And then if I say, okay, we're going to want to put 1 user on each core, you can see that significantly increases the total number of session hosts required to run this environment. So by default, again, unless you understand, or unless you really know the end user and you say, no, these are very, very powerful users, or you say, these are 100% task workers, maybe they just use Excel and Word and they're going to be, typing in calculations into Excel, and that's all they're using their desktop for. you know, in that sense, you might be able to get by with maybe like a task worker, right? 6 users on every virtual core, and you know, in that case, you only require 2 VMs. But by default, and I'd say the vast majority of our partners just leave this at professional worker. You know, it's a pretty good assumption, and it'll probably help your environment to be priced and calculated a little bit more accurately. So we'll leave that as is at the professional worker. Continuing on to the servers tab, for this deployment, I'm going to add 2 additional line of business servers. So we're going to call these, you know, lob servers. I'm going to put them on a D8 SV3, and I will add some additional storage here. And again, this is just to kind of simulate a fairly robust end user environment. For most cases, you probably are going to have something that looks a little bit different than this right here. However, this is kind of a good representation of what a robust environment would look like. For the file server and the domain controller, you can generally leave these to the default, but for the sake of this deployment with 50 users, I'm going to go ahead and put this on a D4 SV3, and then we'll keep them on a premium disk here. That's good. All right, so now let's talk about the licensing piece. So licensing, there are 2 ways you can license WVD, right? But at the end of the day, it's important to make sure that every user who's leveraging a Windows Virtual Desktop has at least a Windows 10 license. That's kind of the end goal of this licensing. So there's 2 ways to do that. By default, Microsoft 365 licensing has the Windows 10 license built into it. So if you want to get, you know, the increased security features, the entire Office suite, and the Windows 10 all bundled up into one license, I would recommend M365. And what we see is most of our partners decide to go this route. They say, hey, you know what, we're going to maybe do away with some of our old licensing. We're going to start fresh. We like the added security. You know, we like the features that Microsoft is providing. And I'll be honest, Microsoft really is making it very accommodating to switch to M365. It's kind of their one-size-fits-all license, and they're really pushing partners there, and they're providing some good incentives to do that. However, we do run into scenarios where partners say, you know what, we have existing licensing, maybe it's, you know, Office 365, E3, and they don't really want to make the transition to Microsoft 365 licensing, right? In that case, what you could do is just provide the Windows 10 license here. That's $7 per user, and you know, they can cover their licensing there. And then the other option, the final option, would be to kind of do a split scenario, right? Where you say, hey, there are, you know, 50 users in the environment. We're going to say 25 of them we're going to move to M365. The other 25 we're going to leave with their current Office licensing and just apply the Windows 10. So you can see here from the pricing calculator, when we make some of these changes, they are pretty dynamic in the sense that if I say, hey, we're actually going to have 0 licenses for Windows 10, I'll just uncheck that. You can see right here what that price difference would look like. And if I bump this up to 50, you can immediately see that in the price calculator reflected. So as you're going through and quoting this, you know, this floating window here is kind of a good representation of what your active price would look like. So for the sake of this deployment, I'll say that the existing the 5 dedicated desktop users, we're going to leave their current licensing, but for all the pooled users, we're going to put them on M365. And so you can just see that broken up here, just to provide some diversity for the quote here. So then continuing on, let's talk a little bit about some of these options like Azure Hybrid Benefit and Reserved Instance. And I'm not going to get too much into detail with these, but I'll give you kind of an overview. So Reserved Instance, basically what this is saying is you're committing to Microsoft that you will commit to a certain amount of core or VM consumption for a given period of time, right? And Microsoft loves this because it helps them to anticipate the type of workload that would be placed on their data center for, again, a given period of time. So you can say, you know, hey, we want this for 1 year or for 3 year. We highly recommend that anytime you go with reserved instance, select a 3-year reserved instance, just because the cost savings is far more significant overall. So you can see if I say we're going to do this as a pay-as-you-go model, and we don't want to use any gears or levers whatsoever, you can see right here the Azure cost for this environment would be $2,624. If I apply a 1-year reserved instance, that's going to jump down to 2,057. And if I apply a 3-year, 2,000 or 1,769. So the difference of applying a reserved instance is a cost savings of almost $1,000 per month in this environment, which is, you know, $12,000 per year. So just committing to a 3-year reserved instance is pretty significant when it comes to the cost savings that you get to appreciate in a given environment. Now, some of the hesitation with reserved instance is that you are committing to 3 years of Azure spend on a given virtual machine series size. Now, Microsoft, because they understand some of the hesitation, they've made this dynamic in 2 ways. The first option is you have the ability to adjust from one series size to the next. So if you wanted to do a D2 SV3 and then the partner said, hey, we want to upgrade to a D4 SV3, you could apply this reserved instance to the D4 SV3 and kind of make an adjustment there. Microsoft won't ding you for making that adjustment. They'll just make you pay the difference to upgrade to a D4 SV3 reserved instance. The other scenario is maybe the client says, hey, we're done. We're going to walk away from the cloud altogether, right? In that case, the Microsoft allows you to pay 12% of the remainder that's left on the contract. So if you're on a 3-year reserved instance and you are 2 years into it, then you would actually just pay 12% of the 2 years that are left, right? So that's just something to keep in mind is although you are committing to 3 years, these are pretty dynamic and flexible commitments. And oftentimes there are easy ways to get out of it if for whatever reason the scenario required it. Now, before I go too much further in this, I just want to give a quick demonstration of some of the value that Nerdio brings to the table. So if I put this to no, right, we're going to continue on the pay-as-you-go model, and I come up here to the top. Nerdio has built into our script some dynamic cost savings with what we call auto scaling. And I'll get into the auto scale rules a little bit later and kind of walk you through how to configure those once you're in a live deployment. But just here from a pricing standpoint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to match both of these numbers together, right? And so what this means is you're on pay as you go and you're not scaling in any hosts. You're maybe doing this manually in the Azure backend, right? You can see that right off the bat, the actual monthly cost for Azure is at $3,112, right? And this is kind of what you'd expect in a typical environment without any gears or levers and definitely without using the Nerdio automation. But even if you don't want to use reserved instance or Azure hybrid benefits, right off the bat, just by leveraging the Nerdio tool, excuse me, just by leveraging the Nerdio tool, by selecting this here, you can see the cost savings that you get to appreciate through leveraging auto scale settings, right? And again, I'll walk through what this looks like, but I like to show this just so you guys can see, you know, the price savings right off the bat through Nerdio is fairly significant in the sense that, you know, as you have these environments and as you're leveraging some of the gears and levers that we have natively without any commitments to Microsoft, you're automatically realizing significant cost savings at the end of the day. So there's something I like to point out. So continuing on, and I'll kind of wrap up this quote now. Actually, before I do that, let's talk about Azure Hybrid Benefits for a second. So Azure Hybrid Benefits, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with it, but it's just purchasing the operating system license beforehand. And in this case, we have several line of business servers. So we'll go ahead and commit to a one-year Azure Hybrid Benefits, and we can specify what servers we're going to select this with. So by default, we don't recommend you do it on a B series virtual machine instance. The reason is because Microsoft has already discounted this virtual machine instance significantly, and so you actually end up paying more when you apply Azure Hybrid Benefits, right? So what we would say is go ahead and apply it to any D series, E series, you know, N series, any other series really than the B series. So we would go ahead and you can see we've got this checked for the 2 line of business servers we have, and then also for the file server. And what this provides is it is an additional upfront cost, but you can see the overall Azure cost was reduced. So if I turn this back to no, you can see per month that increases by, you know, about $800. But if we go ahead and switch to Azure Hybrid Benefits, there's a one-time fee of $800. So the first month, there won't be any difference. But every month after that, there's a significant cost savings. And then if we apply a 3-year reserved instance on top of that, you can see how dynamic the pricing is now for this environment, which is still fairly robust, but we're able to apply a lot of these gears and levers to reduce the overall cost to, $53 per user, versus if we kept all of these off and we were not using the Nerdio tool, now we're at $93 per user. So just by leveraging, again, some of these gears and levers, we can appreciate some significant cost savings, and it allows you to enter this space beating all your competitors just because you understand some of the dynamic resources and tools you have at your disposal. So we'll go ahead and apply the 3-year RI again, the 1-year subscription, and we'll put this down to 1 because we're applying the Nerdio piece there. And then we're going to go ahead and turn backups on. We're going to say, yes, there will be a site-to-site VPN connection, and this might be temporary, maybe just for your migration piece. It's really not a lot. If we put this on to no, you can see immediately it's only about a $25 cost increase there. So, it's really not too bad. And then everything else looks good. No on-ramp regions. I'll talk a little bit later about on-ramp regions. This is another cool feature that Nerdio offers. And then continuing down here, the personal desktops. Let's go ahead and place them on D2 SV3 VMs. And then the final thing I'll talk about is it is fairly important to specify your region. And the reason is because Azure actually costs a little bit different depending on what region you select. So in this case, you can see we're in South Central, but if I went to maybe, East US, and it'll adjust it, you can see that actually saved me about $3 per end user, right? And maybe I'll go, I'll try the West US region. You can see that's actually more expensive. So, from a WVD standpoint, because when you're on WVD, you're actually streaming the desktop to your location. It's not necessarily like a site-to-site VPN connection. It's something that's being transferred on the Azure and the Microsoft fiber backbone, and then you're getting that desktop almost broadcasted to you. Because of that, having the resources in a data center right next to you is not as important. So if maybe you're in, central US and the data center in central US is closer, but the, central US 2 or maybe East US 2 is a better price, it's not that bad to actually switch to that data center just to make sure that you're realizing some of the cost savings there. So obviously it's up to you what region you select, but just kind of another tip on how you can save the clients or maybe yourself a few extra dollars at the end of the day. So then what we would do is view cost. We can kind of see the total monthly cost and then everything broken down in line items as to what the environment will entail. So again, I know you guys saw this from Pete yesterday, but hopefully this is a little bit better and more of a thorough walkthrough. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through now and I'll show you kind of how to build out an environment that's basically identical to this quote. So we'll go ahead and back up one and I'll go to the accounts page. And so step 1 is, okay, you guys just won this deal. This is awesome. The client is super excited. You're able to save them a lot of money. You have a very competitive offer. And they say, all right, let's get started. Okay, so you log in here to the Nerdio app and portal. You go to app.nerdio.net. You say we want to add an NFA account, right? And in our case, we quoted an enterprise WVD environment. We're going to go ahead and push next. And what you require for the initial start process is you need a single user who is a global admin in the Azure tenant and the Office tenant, and also is an owner on the O36 or on the Azure subscription, right? So those are the 3 requirements for that user. And again, owner of the Azure subscription and a global admin on the Azure and the Office tenant. All right, what you'll do is you will connect that user. And once that user is connected, the rest of it's pretty easy, right? You specify the Azure subscription, you name your resource group, and you can provision Nerdio into a subscription with existing resource groups. Just make sure there's no overlap on the name there. You would select Azure hybrid benefits, and we kind of just went through this in the pricing calculator. Our recommendation is always leave this to no, and the reason is because it's very easy to go after the fact and turn on Azure hybrid benefits for specific servers. But if you set this to no, it's going to default to no for all servers that are created, and then you'll have to go manually through and add that back in. So again, unless you know for a fact that you're not going to, or that you're going to have Azure hybrid benefits applied to every server, yeah, that warning just says, hey, you're eligible for the auditing piece of this. But yeah, so I'd say leave this to no, specify the region, give the name of the company, and then specify the Nerdio Active Directory domain. Our recommendation is to leave this to default, which is nerdio.int. However, you can change this to something a little more friendly or specific to your organization. The only stipulation there is do not make the Nerdio internal domain the same as the on-prem internal domain, because that can create some issues if you've got, you know, the VPN connection set up and you're trying to do something with like a hybrid configuration. So that's the overall setup process. I know that Pete went through this a little bit yesterday, but just wanted to give you guys a quick refresher. You'll push save, and the Nerdio deployment phase, which you guys remember from kind of our different phases we walked through at the beginning, the Nerdio deployment phase is now initiated, right? So we are now, you know, you guys can, it'll bring you back to this page here, and what you'll see is an additional account listed at the bottom, and instead of active, it will say provisioning. And that will run through anywhere from, you know, 3 to 6 hours, kind of depends on what Azure's doing in the back end and the region you guys are in. However, it's pretty quick. You guys can, you know, go do some work, maybe start this over the weekend or, you know, after business hours. And when you wake up the next day, the environment will be provisioned and ready to go. So then what you'll do is you'll log in, and it will look something like this. So you can see all the tabs here on the left-hand side. We've got the home screen here. This environment is a demo environment. You can see we already have a lot of users listed in here, but what I'll do is I'll kind of show what it would look like if it's fresh and clean, and then you know, we can go through the different steps of actually building out this environment to match the quote. Right. So by default, Nerdio provisions with 4 users. So you wouldn't see 117 here. You just see a 4. They're all assigned resources. So one of them has a dedicated desktop. The other 3 are assigned to the initial pool that's created. And so what you could do is go to the users tab. You can reset the passwords. If you want to jump in immediately and test out the environment, you can do that. They're just provided there for you, just kind of as a demo and an initial way for you to navigate the environment. So the very first thing that we recommend in a brand new deployment is to turn backups on, right? So what you do is you go here to backup and DR, select in-region backups, right? And it'll take a second to load, but essentially what we're doing is we want to create a fresh, clean snapshot of every virtual machine in the environment, right? And this is before you jump in and start logging onto the domain controller, the file server, modifying any of the pool templates or the golden image, right? The first thing we want to do when you come into this environment is turn backups on, and you're going to select backup now, right? So by default, every new Nerdio provision environment is going to have this switch to off. And the reason is because when this is set to on, it does subscribe you to some additional cost, right? Microsoft and Azure will charge you because you're building a recovery service vault and you're backing up the data disks of these VMs. Now, something to keep in mind is, and in the quote that we just walked through, is I did turn in-region backups on in the quote, and I did kind of anticipate this, and you should really do that for every new opportunity. So I would not foresee this being a surprise to you guys. You should have this set to on by default. So what you do is you turn this to on. When you select this toggle and turn it to on, you'll be prompted with a message that says, do you want to do, you know, locally redundant or, you know, geo redundant or zone redundant backups? Locally redundant should be sufficient. You have 3 copies of your data in a given region or a given data center, and that's fine for most environments, and that's what we have here. Additionally, Nerdio provisions with the backup stack v2 policy. So what that entails you to is a single backup around 1 a.m. every day, and that retention period is 30 days. If you'd like to change that, you absolutely can. You just go to the Azure backend, go to, you know, the backup policy and make that change. And we have some partners who do, you know, some partners say, hey, the 30-day retention period is not enough for us. We need maybe a 90-day or 120-day or 10-year retention on our backups, right? Obviously, that's going to cost you a little bit more. However, that is up to you and the client depending on the needs of the environment. So then what you would do is once you get into this environment, you go ahead and enable backups on all of the VMs, I would say, in the environment, excluding maybe the proxy server, right? And I'll talk about the proxy a little bit later. But what you do is you'd enable backups, and then you'd select this dropdown and say backup now. What this is going to do is it's going to do a backup of the domain controller. You'll do that to the file server, the golden image, and then the initial pool template, which would be pool template A that's created, right? So then once that's done, now you know, hey, I've got a fresh, clean image to fall back on. The environment is ready to go. It's in a good condition, and now you can go in, you can go crazy, you can make changes, you can do whatever you want. Because if for whatever reason something got messed up, you don't have to worry about trying to rebuild the environment or contact us and try to get us to restore one of your VMs, right? It's as simple as coming here, saying, all right, we made a mistake. We're going to go ahead and restore this VM, and we're going to do it to maybe, a day earlier. You can see here the 23rd, we've got this. And then you just check this box to say, hey, I understand this is a full restore. We're going to revert back to this exact time period. And then you say confirm. It'll run through. And as long as it's within the last 2 days, it's kind of a quick snapshot backup. So it'll only take 20 minutes to restore your VM. So that's the backup section. The next thing you're going to do is go to onboard and domains, and you'll go ahead and link the client's primary domain to this environment, right? So by default, Nerdio provisions with a federated domain, and they're all pretty predictable. They have the specific account ID, so you can see in this case 5525.nerdio.net, and that is a federated domain, right? So what you would do is you'd say, all right, we're going to go ahead and link the current client domain. So if Nerdio was the client in this case, our primary domain would be getnerdio.com. So we go ahead and add a domain, put in the text record for verification, and then you'd see that domain listed here as an additional line item, and it would say managed in parentheses rather than federated. What you do then is you would set that domain as the default, and that domain will now become the default domain. And this is important for the user import process, for creating additional users, right? You want to make sure that the domain is set so that there's no conflict with the existing Office 365 tenant or when creating additional users. So once that's done, you're kind of in good shape. But I would say the next thing to do is to set up a site-to-site VPN connection, right? We want line of sight between this new Azure environment and the current on-prem environment. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to network here. We're going to go ahead and select VPN connections. And what this allows us is the ability to very simply and easily set up a VPN connection. So just make sure there are no, rules in the firewall that would be preventing this connection on-prem. And then from a Nerdio standpoint, you just fill out a simple form, right? And doing this in the Azure backend is possible, but it's a little bit more complex. So once you fill out this form from a Nerdio perspective, the script within Nerdio is going to go into Azure and it's going to make those changes for you, right? So it would include, you'd turn this on, right? So VPN connections, you toggle that switch to on, then you'd say add VPN connection. And this is as complicated as it gets, right? You specify a name, enter in the gateway IP address, local network IP, local network subnet mask, push save, and you're off and running, right? This is going to, this form is going to save, it's going to test the connection. And then what you see at the previous screen is, green, a little green word next to it that says connected, right? You got a good connection, you're ready to go. So now we know, hey, backups are turned on. The default domain has been set for this environment and a VPN connection has been configured, and we have line of sight between Azure and the on-prem environment, right? So once you have all three of those done, now we can move to the next phase, which is kind of the infrastructure phase, right? It's building out those additional line of business servers. It's, modifying the pool templates, and it's making some of those changes. So now let's jump to the servers tab and we'll walk through those in a little bit more detail. So you can see again, this is an existing test environment. What you would get by default when you provision a new environment is these three servers right here. All right, Nerdio provisions by default a domain controller, and this is required by Microsoft for any WVD deployment. Right, and this is also the host of AD Connect. It's basically your domain controller. So we've got DC01 here specified for that. Next, we have the file server here, and the file server really serves two purposes. the first functionality is as a file server, right? We do some file sharing and some folder redirection and things like that from the file server. But the second reason is because it is the source of FS logics, right? And FS logics, if you guys aren't very familiar with WVD, FS logics is kind of the brains behind the WVD orchestration. So it's the thing that manages, the VHDs, profile redirects, permissions, resource allocation for specific users. It's kind of the overall configuration, for WVD kind of runs through, and the assignment runs through FS logic. So that's why these two servers are required. The proxy server is kind of a situation where it's better to have it than to not have it. So what I mean by that is, if you are operating with a federated domain and the Nerdio default domain that gets provisioned is federated, right? It's managed internally. In that case, the proxy server is required for DNS. So what you do is you leave this proxy server on and running as your basically, DNS servers. What you could do though, let's say that in our case, for instance, our Get Nerdio domain is managed, right? It's not managed internally, it's managed by, the provider of the actual domain. So what you would do there is you go ahead and say, you know what? We don't have a federated domain. We don't need this proxy server. So I would say reduce the drive size here to an HDD drive, and then go ahead and select this dropdown and say stop, right? That will place this server in a deallocated state in Azure, and it will release the resources. You'll only pay for the disk. It's a few dollars every month. It's not much, and it's there in case you need to transition the client's domain to federated, or you need to leverage the default Nerdio domain for testing down the road. So, in most cases, we see partners turn this proxy server off, but it is there just in case you need it. So again, once you get in the environment, you'd see these three servers at the bottom, and your first thing is probably, all right, let's go ahead and build out these line of business servers, right? The two line of business servers we talked about. So through Nerdio, it's pretty simple. You go ahead and just say add server here, and you fill out this form. Here we go. So we're going to say, yep, this is our line of business server. You're going to specify the operating system. So you could say, yeah, we want, data center or Windows server rather, 2019 data center, 2016, 2012 R2. If you're going to go maybe with Linux, or, you want maybe Linux Ubuntu, SQL Server, right? We've got several different OS allocations available here. For the sake of this conversation, we'll go ahead and say, all right, these are going to be two server 2019 data center servers. Then you specify the disk type. So, in this case, standard SSD is fine. And in our quote, we said it was going to be a D8 SV3, right? So we've got D8 SV3 specified, D series, and on-ramp region, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We'll go ahead and just leave this as is. We don't want to place it in an on-ramp region. So that's pretty much the degree of complexity that's required to provision a new server, right? Once you push OK, this VM will get created in the environment, right? And you'll see it as an additional virtual machine listed here. It'll provision for maybe 20, 30 minutes. And then once it's done, it will be placed inside the network. It will be, under the existing Azure resource group that this entire deployment is under. And you can go ahead and generate an RDP file, log in, and configure that and install your various softwares. So, again, you do that a second time for adding the second line of business server. And at that point, you'd be up and running. Now, those two servers, you can kind of configure them out of the box with the correct, VM size. If you wanted to, you could change the VM size. So let's say instead of a D8 SV3, you specified an E series VM, right? You could, select the drop down here and specify the different VM series size you wanted, or maybe an N series. And we understand here at Nerdio that a lot of partners don't have an intricate understanding of the different VM sizes and what they do. So we provided kind of this short little sentence or two that just kind of gives you a good description of when this VM size is most effectively applied. So in this case, the N series is good for GPU enabled loads. Maybe you've got, graphics intensive work, or maybe, developers or people who just require a more robust amount of resources. F series is more for web servers, and B series is for burstable drives. I mean, you get the point, right? So you could specify that here, but you provision it with the correct VM size right out of the box. But what happens if you provision this environment and, like in our quote, we said that the file server is going to be a D4 SV3, but we can see here that out of the box it's going to provision with a D2 SV3. Well, through the Nerdio automation, changing that VM size is actually pretty straightforward. All you have to do is select this little pencil, and it opens up this form and it says, okay, we know you want to change the VM size. What series size would you like? And so you just select this drop down. You'd specify, hey, we want the D4 SV3 rather than the D2 SV3. And you go ahead and push confirm. And then the Nerdio automation is going to run into the Azure backend. It's going to run our script. And what you'll see is this will pen for a little bit. It'll say, task in progress. And then it will come back up and you'll see that new VM size specified. So making changes through the Nerdio admin portal, we like to say the most complex tasks should be able to be accomplished in 3, maybe 4 clicks or less, right? So in an environment like this, this is something, as you guys can see just from the brief look we've had so far, even maybe a tier 1 or a tier 2 engineer can actually manage this environment, right? If they have that quote that you delivered and you said, all right, we need, D8 SV3 virtual machines. We want this amount of additional storage applied. The file server needs to be this size. As long as they know what buttons to push, they don't have to be experts in Azure to actually administer this environment, right? And changing the disk is also the same process. Maybe we want to add some additional storage. You've got users loading up on this data disk here on FS01, right? We had those 50 users, and 256 gigabytes of storage is not enough. So we're going to go ahead and select this. And maybe we say, hey, this is not enough. So we're going to go with, actually that's good. The P20, it's going to double the existing storage capacity, and it's going to put them both on premium SSD, right? Keep this box checked to grow the Windows volume or the Windows partition automatically. Push OK, and again, our script's going to go in the back end. It's going to make those changes, and what you'll see is, 15, 20 minutes later, this is now the correct size on the file server here, right? So, if you're kind of going along with me now, we've got, in a live environment, we'd have the 2 additional line of business servers. FS01 is sized correctly, and from an initial infrastructure standpoint, we're sized appropriately, right? So now let's talk about actually getting access to these servers. Okay, so you are now in the environment and you say, okay, I want to log on to the domain controller, right? You go ahead and generate an RDP file here, and you can see this form, right? We've got some specific details about redirection and things like that. But we want to try to keep this environment as secure as possible. So what we do is we actually create exclusions in our firewall or network security group, and we say, all right, we're going to kind of poke a hole in there for a specific period of time to allow the RDP file that you download to have access, and you'll be able to connect to the domain controller, in this case, with this RDP file. Now, you can change this if you want. If you say, hey, we actually want this to be maybe worth 4 hours, right? There's going to be some project work going on and you want it open for half the day. You can specify that here. You can say, we're going to go ahead and select 4 hours. Once you push download, it's going to kind of poke that hole in there, and then you can leverage that RDP file to access. Now, something to keep in mind, not every single user has access to, even if you have this RDP file, and even if they've poked the hole in the firewall and you've got this this RDP file set, if the user you're leveraging is not a domain admin, they still won't be able to get access. And the reason is because, obviously the file server and the domain controller are a lot of the brains and a lot of the sensitive information of the environment is stored here. So we don't want to just give any individual the ability to access these servers. So I'll talk a little bit later when we're covering the users tab about exactly how to provide domain admin credentials, or domain admin rights rather. But just for the sake of what we're doing right now, just understand, accessing these servers requires a domain administrator to actually access. So now that we've got, again, our initial servers provisioned, let's continue in the configuration process, and we'll talk about WVD pools here. So Pools is really, they're kind of some of the secret sauce of Azure and Microsoft and what makes WVD such an attractive offering. And the idea there is when you have a subset of users on a pool, in our case, we would have 45 users assigned to a single pool. The pool is kind of a dynamic collection of resources that can grow and retract based on the use case of the individual users who are accessing it, right? So by default, again, you can see we've built out this environment, this demo environment with several pools. By default, you'll just have a single pool in here. It'll be called Pool A, right? So once you're on this environment, okay, you've configured your initial servers and you move down here and you say, all right, we're going to now go through and configure the pool for the users. Maybe you need to install, make sure Chrome's up to date, install the latest Office suite. You're going to maybe install, a few different applications, right? What you do is you go ahead and select Manage Hosts. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring you on the back end here of this environment. So as you guys can see, we have two different virtual machines here, right? We have the template listed down here, and then we have the session host listed up here at the top. So the distinction between the two is the template is what is used when you're making any type of global change. And this is kind of another value add that Nerdio provides, right? So generally in a standard environment, if you're making a modification or adjustment on a specific host, you have to go make it on every single host, right? And those hosts, once you make a change, it's going to be permanent to the host. And you would almost see those hosts as very permanent resources or machines that exist in the ecosystem of the client's environment. With WVD, the session hosts up here are very expendable, and the template is actually the authority for the environment. So what you do is you'd say, I'm going to power on to modify this template, right? You grab this IP address, the 10.125.0.6. You go back to the servers tab, log on to the domain controller or the file server, and you just RDP to this IP address, right? That's going to place you directly on the template. And then what you do is you make all of your installation changes and adjustments right there on the template, right? You install your applications, you do your configuration, and that template becomes the base, okay? Once you're done, you've made your changes on the template, you sign out, you come back here to the Nerdio admin portal, and this button will say power off and set as image. You select that. It'll run through a script. It's going to sysprep this image, kind of generalize it. And what you'll find at the end is this image now, after about 30 to 45 minutes, is set as the authority for this entire pool. Any additional session hosts that get added, once they get added, they're going to look at the template as their source of authority, and they will get created based, and look almost identical to this template, right? They're going to have the same software, applications, the same version of Windows. Everything is going to have parity with this template. And this is beneficial because now if you need to make a change for, from a software perspective for all users in an environment, all 45 users, all you have to do is go to one central location to make that change, and it's going to apply en masse to any user who accesses the pool because they're being placed on these session hosts that have perfect parity with this template, right? So that's kind of the idea and the relationship between the two. So now let's talk about some specifics. So let's say this environment is live and in production, all right? And you have, an additional application that needs to be installed, right? You install that application to the template, but let's say it's during the middle of the day, right? And let's say for the sake of this conversation and based on our quote, you had 3 additional session hosts loaded up in here, right? So we have 4 total. And if you remember from our cost estimator, that's the way we would have sized an environment with 45 users. Okay, so we've got these 4 additional session hosts listed in here, and we need to update these hosts, but we understand that updating a session host from the template will kick all current users who are logged in. So you can see here we have 0 users, but in the case of maybe a live deployment with 45 users, these are pretty standard users, maybe you have 10 or 15 users all loaded up on this individual session host, right? So what you would do then is you'd select this drop down and you would deactivate this host, okay? What that does is it places this host on its own section in the pool, right? And it removes it as an eligible host for new users to log into, right? What it provides you the opportunity to do then is to take these users and actually filter current users off of the session host and allow you to take this host after all users are logged out. Maybe you click this button, you can see what users are logged in, and you send them a message and say, hey, we're going to be doing some general maintenance. Do you mind just logging out, logging back in, right? When they log back in, they will be placed on the additional session host. And once all users are logged out, you can select this dropdown and say update hosts, right? That's going to then go through. It's going to update this host from the template. And what you'll see is the template date stamp will match this template date stamp, right? So you can say, all right, this session host is up to date as of this template and the latest and greatest changes that were made. And then you go through that and you do that amongst all hosts. And now it's maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. All users are operating on the new version based on the template. And from your perspective, it was pretty seamless. The other way to do it, instead of doing it from a host by host standpoint, is maybe it's after hours. You've got 4 session hosts in the pool and you say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and run through and update all hosts. You select this dropdown, choose update hosts, and it will simultaneously apply that update to every host in the pool. And that's generally what we see most partners try to do, just because it's way more simple, it's streamlined, and it allows them to, just with one click of a button, make a mass change versus a lot of manual work. So that's kind of the dynamic between the two. Now we talked about, updating hosts. The other option is to add a host manually, right? So what you'd say is add host in here. It's going to provision an additional host underneath this existing host, and now you have 2 hosts in here. And something to keep in mind is these hosts are built to be expendable, right? If you have auto scaling turned on, what auto scaling is going to do is, and I'll walk through this next in more detail so you guys have a full understanding, but based on the CPU utilization in this environment, maybe this CPU you can see is currently sitting at 1%. But if on average over a 30-minute period, CPU exceeds maybe 65%, what the automation is going to do is it's going to add an additional host so that the next user that logs in doesn't get placed on a crowded host, but gets placed on this additional host, right? And then at the end of the day, after hours, as users are logging out, it will remove these session hosts. And you'll remember, Microsoft charges based on consumption. So what this allows is it allows you to have a very well-sized environment for users. It's going to help avoid latency. It'll help provide an excellent end user experience. But for the remaining maybe 16 hours during the day when users are not working, you're not paying for that robust environment. You're just paying for a single session host because this environment is scaled in. So that's the way that session hosts are designed, and as you can see, they're going to get added and recreated on a daily basis. So, we encourage partners, don't get attached to these session hosts. If you have a session host that's running into some issues, just add a new host, select this dropdown, and delete the existing host, right? That's going to remove the host from the pool. It will, delete that. The new host that gets added in will be fresh and clean based on the template, and you'll be up and running. So those are that's kind of a good overall understanding of the pool and the way to make different changes, right? So now let's talk about adjusting some of the logic in the pool. So we're going to jump back to the servers tab here. You can see we're back at the main server screen. Let's scroll down and let's go back into pool A. And if you remember, in a standard deployment, you're just going to have pool A. So instead of pushing manage host, let's select this dropdown and we'll say manage auto scale, right? What this is going to do is it's going to bring us to this form in the back end. So what you can do is by default, this will be turned off. We're not going to make any assumptions for you. We're going to let you configure it. So you'd select on. We're going to enable auto scaling. And if you remember from the quote, we said, okay, the max size of the servers, we want no more than 4 session hosts in this environment at full capacity, right? But there's always going to be at least 1. And the reason is because this individual session host is used as the standard for scaling out additional session hosts. So what the logic is going to do is it's going to look at these triggers and it's going to apply that to the individual session hosts in the pool in order to know when to actually scale out and add the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th session host, right? So, and I'll get to these in a second, but one more thing I want to show is these standby hosts. So a standby host is a host that has been built but is powered off and sitting in the pool waiting to be powered on, okay, based on these rules. And the reason you'd want a standby host is, let's say, these rules get triggered, but that users are logging in at a pretty frequent rate, and you don't want the pool to have to build a brand new session host from scratch, right? Obviously, that's going to be a longer process than just turning on a session host. So what you could do is you could come here and say, we want 1 standby host which is a host that's built, it's deallocated, but it's sitting there in the pool ready to be turned on. So when the scale out rules get triggered and you need to add an additional host, this rule right here will get triggered, and what it's going to do is just power on that standby host, and then that'll get added. You would see this right here. Instead of one, there's now going to be 2 session hosts in the pool, and then an additional standby host would get built, but then it's going to sit there in the pool waiting to be leveraged. So, you know, standby hosts can be effective depending on how frequently users are going to be logging in. So I'll keep this to 0 just because we didn't specify any in our quote, but that's kind of another good feature that you can apply to provide for some more dynamic scaling. So now let's talk about the scaling logic. So this is pretty straightforward. Basically, it says add a host if average CPU across all hosts exceeds a certain percentage for a given period of time. So in this case, by default, it's set to 65. Some partners say, hey, we want this set to 80. Others say, no, that's too aggressive. Let's go ahead and go to 50. You know, this is obviously something you guys can modify at your discretion. We lead to 65 by default. And then this given period of time, you know, this basically is saying how long do you want the CPU to you know, exceed the given logic for. So you could set this to, you know, 5 minutes if you wanted, all the way up to an hour. So it's kind of up to you how you set that. 15 minutes is pretty typical, but you can set this, right? The next line of logic says, go ahead and remove a host if average CPU across all hosts drops below a given percentage or a specific percentage for a given period of time, right? So in this case, you might say, you know what, we want to actually reduce this to 30%, right? Whatever you have this set to, that's totally okay. But what it's going to do is once maybe you have 3 hosts in the pool and maybe host number 2 is not being fully utilized, and so it causes the average CPU across all hosts to drop down. So what it's going to do then is it's going to send this message to users and say, hey, sorry for the interruption. We're doing some housekeeping. Do you mind logging out of the pool and logging back in? When they log out and log back in, they'll get placed on one of the other session hosts, and then the session host that was specified to be scaled in, we'll say session host 2 in this case, will get removed from the pool, and users will be up and running and working on the remaining 2, and you'll appreciate some of the cost savings there. Now, you know, that sounds great. Some of the situations where we see that go backwards is, let's say there's 45 users and everybody goes out to lunch at, you know, noon, or maybe 2/3 of the user base, right? It's, you know, they all leave for lunch, they go out, or maybe there's some type of company event going on. They come back and everybody's been kicked out of their session, right? That's obviously ideal. Maybe, you know, they were gone for an hour. Clearly, that's going to trigger this 15-minute scale-in rule. And now you have a bunch of users who are irritated because they had applications open. They were in the middle of their workday working, and the entire environment got scaled in on them, and all the hosts got removed. So to avoid that scenario, what we've done is we've put in this work hours trigger, right? So what you can do is you can say, okay, our work hours are actually from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., right? You give yourself a little bit of a buffer there. And you say, you specify the time zone, and you say, during work hours, do not trigger this scale in rule, right? Add additional hosts, that's fine. We're going to go ahead and scale out the environment, but we don't want users to get kicked off. Then after hours, as they're logging out for the day and users are kind of leaving, then we can go ahead and trigger these scale in rules, and we'll go ahead and reduce the number of session hosts in the pool down to 1, right? In that case, that's a perfect application. Users have a great experience during the day, and you as the client and then the partner gets to appreciate the cost savings through some of the scale-in logic, right? So this is kind of a great way to leverage this. It's very effective, and it provides, again, for a great end user experience. Now, this is great, but another thing to keep in mind is if there are 45 users in an environment, right? Let's say we know they're all going to log in right about the same time during the day, right? Maybe they come in around 8 o'clock in the morning, or in this case, 7 o'clock in the morning. And right now we only have 1 session host in there. So if we know at full capacity, this pool is going to require 4 session hosts, right? Then when users log in, they're going to immediately crowd out this single session host, and it's going to cause for a terrible experience for the first hour or 2 as all these triggers are getting met and additional session hosts are being built in the pool, right? So in order to avoid that, we have this rule right here about pre-staging hosts. And what we say is, okay, typical work week is maybe Monday through Friday, right? At the start of the workday, And I would say set this to the actual start of the workday. This rule will get triggered an hour prior to make sure that the session hosts are built in time, right? But you say at the start of the workday, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have 4 session hosts ready to go in the pool, right? We want that when users log in, we have 100% of the resources available, or maybe you say 3, right? That might be a better application. So you know, hey, as long as the majority of users are logging in, we'll be able to absorb that. Maybe, you know, some users are off or other people have meetings, they're not really in their session. So instead of maxing it out to full capacity, let's have 3 session hosts ready and built in the pool. And then when users log in, they're able to, you know, realize 3 of those session hosts. It can expand out to 4 if necessary, but the environment is at least appropriately sized at the beginning of the workday, right? And you've already kind of anticipated, hey, we're going to have, you know, the workdays from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So it doesn't cost you any more because you've already anticipated this in your pricing. However, the end user and the client always has a fantastic experience because the environment is sized correctly for their use case. And you know, one other thing to keep in mind too is, you know, maybe you have users who want to log in over the weekend and work. That's another reason why we leave one host in the pool at all times, is to provide those kind of off-hour workers or maybe those weekend workers the ability to still access the environment and still work after hours. So I know that was, you know, kind of a lot to cover in a short period of time when it comes to the scaling logic, but hopefully you guys followed along and kind of see how a lot of these rules and these triggers can be applied to both allow for a fantastic end user experience, but also a great amount of cost savings for you as the MSP, and then also to get passed on to the client. So now let's jump back to the service tab and we'll kind of pick up where we were at with this entire migration, right? So we have pool A. You now know how to log in, how to configure the pool template. You've got all of the auto scale settings set and configured correctly. Applications are installed. You've got your line of business servers built. But now maybe you say, okay, now we actually need to talk about the migration piece. And, you know, if you remember from the very first or the second slide we covered, when it comes to the entire migration process, you had 2 options. You could lift entire servers existing on-prem into the Azure environment, or you could leverage one of the default Nerdio tools called the data mirroring tool, and you could transfer documentation, you could transfer files, you could transfer folders into the existing Azure environment. So we're going to assume for the sake of this demonstration that that is the path that you selected. So what we're going to do is, and remember, you know, kind of using our imagination a little bit, but we're imagining we have 2 additional servers, line of business servers here. So now what we're going to do is go to onboarding and we're going to select data mirroring, right? And so what this allows us is it allows us to specify a source for the data mirroring job, and this is the on-prem server. And if you remember from one of the previous steps, we already established a VPN connection to on-prem, so that's been established. We have good line of sight there, right? So we go ahead and select add source. And it's going to say, okay, what is the name of this source? And maybe, you know, it's line of business server 1, right? And this is the on-prem line of business server. Specify the server IP address, provide credentials for the correct access, go ahead and test the connection, right? Once the connection's tested, it's going to be listed here as an available source, and you can add, you know, as many sources as you want. You could have 10 different sources here, right? Once the source has been specified, you go ahead and say add a job, right? And what this is going to provide is it's going to give you the opportunity to say, all right, we're going to name this job, maybe it's, you know, LOB number 1, right? So it's the data mirroring job to migrate the information from the first line of business server. So what you're going to do is you're going to select your source, drive, and folder. And remember, this is the on-prem server. Then you go here and you select your destination, drive, and folder, and this is the server in the cloud. So it's the first line of business server that we provisioned, and then you schedule the exact job, right? So you say, okay, this job is going to run at a specific period of time. So in this case, maybe 12 a.m., right? Every single day, maybe you could do it once a week, depending on the length of your migration, right? What it's going to do is, based on the policy that you set and the parameters you set, once this is triggered every day or every week, it's going to run this data mirroring job, and it's going to take the information that you're mirroring from on-prem and provide a perfect copy of that to the destination drive and folder in the cloud, right? And most partners have this running every day. They start this maybe a week in advance. And so maybe by Friday night, they say, okay, everything in the cloud is authority. Friday night, we're going to go ahead and cut off this job. So, you know, the final piece in setting up the job is you'd say enabled, you'd say save, and it's going to start running. Once you're done, remember it's Friday, it's at the end of the week, and you're ready to finish this job and you're ready to, you know, actually migrate all the users into the cloud. What you do is you would uncheck this, push save, and what we're assuming is now all of the data on the line of business server in Azure and in Nerdio is the authority. It has the latest and greatest. And on Monday, when users log in, they're going to use the Azure line of business server as the authority for all of this data, right? Maybe, you know, it's a database server or something like that, right? All of the information is going to be listed there in the cloud. So this is how complex, honestly, a data mirroring setup looks like. As long as you have the VPN connection set up, you establish the source, then you're going to go ahead and establish the destination, schedule it to run, push save. And again, you can run as many of these as you want. You know, sometimes we'll have partners with 5 or 10 of these jobs all running, and it doesn't necessarily interrupt the on-prem environment or the Azure environment. It just makes sure that there's perfect parity between the on-prem environment and Azure. So that's the data mirroring piece. All right, so now let's talk about the user piece. So if you're kind of following along in that progression that we were following, we have the servers configured, we've got backups turned on, we have, you know, the domain linked from the current client environment, we've got everything pretty much configured, and we're finally ready to start importing users over, right? So there's 2 ways to import users. The method that we normally recommend, it kind of depends also on the number of users you have in the environment, but what you could do is you could go to this users tab, and you go ahead and scroll to the bottom, and what you'd see is manage other AD users. You would see those users, additional users listed here, because what you do, remember, is you linked your Office 365 account at the very beginning when you were provisioning the environment. There are sometimes some additional steps, like if you have these users synced with an existing Active Directory on-prem, existing AD, then what you do is you'd break that connection with the on-prem AD. You'd go ahead and sync with the new Active Directory, which is going to be housed within Nerdio, right? And this provides no disruption for the end users. All it's basically doing is transitioning who has permissions to manage these users, right? So no migration from the standpoint of email, contacts, calendar, appointments, nothing like that, right? All we're doing is saying, hey, you are not managed by on-prem anymore. You're now managed by Azure Active Directory, right? And we've got a nice article that I can point you to a little bit later about that process. But basically what you'll do is you will sync those users with this new Azure environment, right? And then what you're going to do is go ahead and select the users, and you would say import, right? It's going to go through the process. It'll import those users over, and you would see them listed here at the top as available users that you could assign resources to and modify, right? The other way of doing is saying AD export, right? And so if you wanted to, instead of doing it maybe on a user by user basis, you want to do it en masse, you could set up this export job, add the source location, add the job, and go ahead and export all of those users from the existing AD, right? So now let's assume, okay, we've been through that process. Users are now imported over. Again, they're still working on-prem. Everything's working fine. We've just changed the actual management piece, right? So then what we can do is we say, okay, we're finally ready to actually assign resources to these users. So then what you could do is you could go down here and say, okay, instead of going to every single user, selecting that user, going into it and assigning the resource, let's go ahead and do it in bulk, right? And so that's why Nerdio has created this bulk add and update users job, right? And these tools, right? You can add and update users, groups, or contacts. And then you see the data mirroring job here, which is what we just went through. So what you can do is you can download a template with all existing users in the environment. So if you remember, they've already all been imported over, right? They're currently sitting within Azure. And what we can do now is we can download this template. It'll produce basically an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of variables filled in as of what we know right now, right? So it's going to be email address, you know, maybe current Active Directory groups, any alias email addresses, first and last name, some information maybe about location if you have their addresses in there, right? It'll fill in as much information as we know at this point. What you can do then is there's a resource section, and you can say, all right, we're going to assign all 45 of these users to their own pool. The additional 5 users we're going to provide dedicated desktops for, right? You specify that for every user. Once you're done and the Excel spreadsheet has been fully filled out, all of your changes are made for all 50 users. Maybe you're doing password resets, you're making adjustments, right? all you have to do is go down here, you say add job, and you upload that CSV file. What it's going to do then is in bulk for all 50 of those users, it's going to run through an automated script and make all of those changes for you in one go, right? You don't have to sit here for hours babysitting tasks and making adjustments to all 50 users, making sure you have everything right. You fill out that CSV file, that Excel spreadsheet, you upload this job, you run it through here, you name the job, maybe, you know, mass update 1 or bulk update 1, right? Push next, Nerdio automation runs through and does all of those tasks for you. And you are now able to, you know, go work on other projects, go do whatever you want, and knowing that this entire environment, once you get back, all user assignments will be applied appropriately. So that's kind of the bulk update user's job, right? Now, the reverse side of that is, let's say we wanted to go ahead and apply, you know, maybe all of these changes manually, right? So what you do is you come here to the users tab, and I'll use the Andy IT user as an example, right? So you can see this user already has some Office licensing applied. We've got M365 Business Premium. They're already given this pool, and you know, you can see the Active Directory groups applied. But let's say they weren't, right? You want to go in here and you actually want to make some changes to this user manually. Maybe this is after the fact and this is a new hire, right? What you're seeing here is the top of this form is kind of a look into the Office backend. So this would be, you know, first name, last name, primary email address, add any aliases, but then like Office 365 licensing, for instance, right? Enabling multi-factor authentication for this environment. These are going to allow you the opportunity to make a change here, go ahead and scroll down, push save, and our automation is going to go on the back end. It's going to go to the Office 365 portal, and it's going to make those changes in Office for you, but you get the benefit of managing it from one central location, right? So you made this change for this user. They now have the correct Office licensing applied. You know, maybe you adjusted the domain. You applied, maybe, you know, this is the getnerdio.com or the primary domain, right, of this environment. Okay, so you applied that. And you say, all right, you know, by default, this should be set to none for any new user. And you say, okay, we actually want to assign this user to WVD resources. So this section right here is a look at the Azure backend. So we're going to say, okay, we'll apply WVD resources, and you have the option of specifying the pool. So in our case, pool A is all that would exist. It would be the default pool. But let's say this user was one of those 5 users we assigned a dedicated desktop to, right? You'd come down here. You would select personal dedicated desktop. In our case, we decided to go with a D2 SV3. So then we would go ahead and select, you know, D2 SV3 here. And then we would select, you know, the disk. This is probably going to be fine, the OS disk. And what you do is you'd push save, right? What it's going to do now is it'll go ahead and create this desktop for the user. Once the desktop has been created, it'll send them an email and say, hey, congratulations, your desktop has been created. Or if you assign them a pool, you've been, you know, it'll say you've been assigned resources. It'll provide them with the RDP link to go ahead and connect. They'll connect, they'll use their email address and their password they normally authenticate to O365. That will be still used for their Azure resources. They'll log in, they'll be up and running and working just like normal. So that's kind of the manual side. If you wanted to make that change rather than going to the bulk add an update tool, you know, you'd go ahead and you'd make that change here manually for each user on the form. Now, looking at kind of taking another step back, let's kind of refresh now that we know how to do this. And let's say that this user, Andy IT, we're going to actually change. Okay, we're going to pretend we were creating a brand new user. And this is now going to be our administrator user. Okay, and what I mean by that is oftentimes what we find is partners are in the environment, they're excited to get up and running, but they need some type of an admin user to test pools, to log onto the domain controller and the file server, to make administrative level changes, right? If you remember, Nerdio charges based on dedicated desktop assignments. You could have a user in here. As long as this is set to none, Nerdio is not going to charge you a dime for this user. You can still do all of the modifications. You can still change Office licensing. You can make adjustments here. However, we're not going to charge you. And then also Azure is not going to charge you, right? Because that user is not actually using any WVD resources. So from an administrative standpoint, our recommendation is always have a service account in an environment, right? So you could delete our 4 default users to get created, but always leave at least 1 user in there for you guys to leverage. So what I would say is go ahead and select the Office licensing to none. This user is a service account. It doesn't need any Office licensing. It doesn't need any dedicated desktop. But if you remember from when we were back in the Servers tab, I mentioned that the user has to be a global admin in the environment, right? You can see here, local desktop admins, you can specify that, and that's good. You know, every user who has a dedicated desktop should be a local desktop admin. But to give global admin permissions, you actually have to say show extended attributes, scroll all the way to the bottom here, and then grant domain admin rights, okay? And the reason we hide this is because granting domain admin rights to a user provides, you know, very, very almost godlike powers, if you will, in the environment, right? They can modify and change anything they want. They can get onto any server they want. They can kick out any user, delete anything. This is going to be a very, very high level power user, if you will, when it comes to their abilities and permissions in the environment. So what you do is you select check. It's going to say, hey, this will give access to the Nerdio domain controller, just so you know. And you say, yep, this is good. This is what we want. This is our service account. You check this box. This is just kind of another warning. Hey, you're making this, you know, a very robust user. Go ahead and push save. And this user from a billing standpoint is free, right? You did not apply any Office licensing. You did not apply any desktop, Azure desktop assignment, but you need this user in order to access the domain controller in the server, to log into the pool templates, and to, you know, install different software applications, basically to administer the environment. So that's kind of how you would do that from a user standpoint. Now, the final thing I'll talk about here is the on-ramp regions. I know I've kind of talked about that, talked around it a few times, but this is also something that's good to keep in mind. It's more of kind of a fringe use case, if you will. However, it is good for you guys to be aware of. So, you know, as you know, Azure is they have a very robust solution, right? They have data centers all across the globe. I think they're up to like, I don't know, 55 or 60 data centers, something like that. And we also know that oftentimes we're working with clients who have global presences, right? Maybe they have 100 users and 50 of those are, you know, in North or South America, and then maybe they've got, you know, the other 50 spread out across the globe, right? If you have, and if you remember, you can only provision an Azure environment in a single resource group. So if you're trying to choose, okay, we have 100 users, you know, there's really no central location for us to provision this environment in. You know, how do you choose a data center, right? It can be kind of challenging. So what you can do is you can say, all right, well, we know that, you know, the best option for this is to maybe provision a data center close to South America, for instance. But what we want is we want to place a node in Azure regions across the globe near the other locations where these users are sourced. So what you could do then is you could come here, and this is something that Nerdio provides very easily. You could select this dropdown, go to VPN connections or on-ramp regions, scroll down, and you can add this on-ramp region, right? So for the case of this environment, maybe this primary deployment is in, you know, central US, right? But you have a group of users in West Europe. What you can do is you can say add on-ramp region here. You can select the region that you want to add an additional Azure, a node basically for your environment into the Azure subscription and Azure resource group. And then what you can do is when you're building out servers or when you're doing dedicated desktop assignments, you can choose to place those resources in a data center that's near this user group. And so maybe what you do is in the servers tab, you say, hey, we're actually going to build a second pool, and we're going to place that pool in the on-ramp region in the data center near those users, right? That's going to allow you the ability to provide them with local resources. And now when they log into their WVD session, instead of reaching halfway across the globe just to access their resources, they now get to log in and their resources are located in a data center just maybe a few, 100 miles away from their current location. So, again, this is not as common. It's kind of more of a fringe use case, if you will. However, it can be very beneficial, especially if you're dealing with a client who has more of a global presence. So just wanted to bring this to your attention so that you're kind of aware of it, and you know that option is there if it was needed. Now, The final thing I'll talk about, and this is more from an administrative standpoint, when it comes to these environments, is logs and management tasks. So when you're going through your environment, you're making changes and you're modifying and you're doing adjustments and stuff. What this does is it actually provides you with a great log of exactly what tasks took place and what user executed those tasks. Okay, so you can see, this user right here, Tony.partner, went ahead and started the WVD pool host, right? Then he went here and he tried to power off the pool template and set his image, but he ran into an error. Okay, we can see what those tasks were, what time frames those tasks were started, and I like this for two reasons. First of all, just to keep the environment honest, right? If a session host is deleted, or maybe an RDP file is generated for the domain controller, and then the following day you find that a bunch of users are having issues, you could say, hey, what user logged onto the domain controller and started messing with Active Directory permissions, right? You can come here to the logs and you can see a perfect account of exactly what user was making changes. The other reason I like it is in cases of these errors right here, right? So there's generally two types of errors. The first type is kind of a general error, right? And most errors we try to make as plain English as possible. So maybe you are setting up a new environment and you find that there is you're trying to set up a VPN connection, for instance, right? So we're back at the early stages of this environment configuration. You're in the VPN connections and you're trying to specify or set a VPN connection between the on-prem environment and Azure. Oftentimes what we find is partners get confused with the IP settings and they'll come here to the logs, look at the error, and the error says, hey, sorry, there is a IP conflict between this IP address and this other IP address you're trying to specify. The partner says, oh duh, that makes total sense, no worries, and they go ahead and they make those changes, right? Another scenario would be maybe they're trying to log into a server or make a change and they don't have the permissions, right? Maybe they're not a domain admin and the partner, or maybe you or whoever it is, the technician who's executing this task, is confused, forgets about the permission level, and they're like, oh, right, we need to add them as a domain admin, right? Most of the time, these errors provide you, or the technician working on the environment, with the ability to kind of do your own troubleshooting, so to speak, right? You're able to go in there, you're able to make changes, adjust configuration, and when you run into problems, you don't have to necessarily open a ticket with support. Now, there are some cases where these errors are PowerShell. They're pretty lengthy and they can be kind of cryptic and difficult to comprehend and decipher. So in those cases, you could just take a screenshot, send that into support, and that'll help streamline your support engagement, just because now you're providing whoever it is that's working with this on this with you the opportunity to kind of read the error as it's happening. And I'll just tell you from a Nerdio perspective, whenever we are working with partners who run into an issue, one of the first places we always check is logs and then management tasks, and we look at kind of the map of, okay, what events were taking place in this environment up to the error, and then what exactly was that error, right? You can select here to see the error, or sometimes just hover over the error button and it'll show it right there for you. So that is the logs, and just kind of as a recap of what we just went through, we went through the overall cost estimation piece, right? So we priced out the environment, then we went in here, we enabled backups, we linked the domains, we set up the site design VPN connection, we built additional servers, we configured the pool templates, we adjusted auto scaling on the pool. Then what we did is we imported users, we migrated the data from the different virtual machines over, imported users, did user assignments, and then at that point the users are able to log into their environment. And if you'd followed these steps, by the end of the day, when users finally log in, I mean, this is an active environment, right? The line of business servers are up and running, and this is basically what in a nutshell, obviously, what a full deployment would look like. Now, I know we went through a lot today, and if you're asking yourself, hey, how in the world would I possibly remember all this? Because this is kind of new to this space, and we went through quite a few steps. So up here at the top, what we have is the Nerdio deployment packet, and I would highly recommend that you go online, check out this resource. If you just go to help.nerdio.net, log in there, and then just type in deployment packet in the search bar, right? What this does is it highlights several different resources for you as you're getting up and running, right? If you need support, where do you go to contact support? Then what we're going to do is look at provisioning best practices and prerequisites, right? So what this is during the provisioning process, when you're creating your account, if you want to access additional resources about WVD, here's information about our quick start guide. In general for Nerdio for Azure, then we have Windows Virtual Desktop Quick Start Guide, and then another one that explains WVD pools and kind of the logic there in more detail. And then we also have tips for actually provisioning, right? When you're in there, if you said, hey, what were those 3 requirements for the user again? I can't remember. Check out this article and it'll walk you through that. Then as we can continue down, now we're talking about the configuration stage, right? So, you know, the first 7 things to configure in a new Nerdio for Azure environment, this is roughly what I followed for this demonstration. It's those steps. It talks about turning backups on, you know, enabling or linking the domain. It goes through setting up a site-to-site VPN connection, you know, the data mirroring if you need it. A lot of just the different steps. It links you out to a lot of additional resources, user imports, and things like that, right? So I would say, you know, most of our partners find success once they get to the configuration stage following this article. And then we also have an article here that I actually authored, VM sizing and deployment strategy for cost savings and end user performance. So as you're getting in this new environment and you're like, you know, where users are experiencing some maybe initial latency, or maybe you don't want any type of negative user experience, right? You say, hey, we want to make sure we're not experts in sizing VMs in Azure, but we want to make absolutely sure that for the first week or 2, end users have a great experience, right? Maybe you say, we are willing to size this environment a little bit higher than we normally would for production, just to make sure that the users have a good experience, and then we'll kind of dial it back down for cost savings a week or 2 in after the users are thrilled, they're having a great time, and they're really excited about the cloud, right? So this article walks you through all the steps to take for that, and then some great strategies that you can apply to make sure that not only the users are having a great experience, but you're able to appropriately size the environment for your situation. And then the data mirroring or data migration, you know, I talk about VPN connections here, data mirroring. And then finally, we go over some unique use cases. So maybe you're dealing with, you know, an IKE1 firewall, and you need to set up some type of a site-to-site VPN connection. You know, maybe you want to make those bulk user changes and you don't quite remember what we went through when leveraging that tool. You know, modifying additional or existing firewall rules, things like that, right? All of those unique use cases we generally find partners run into can be found here. And then finally, troubleshooting, right? So this kind of helps you see, hey, what is within kind of the purview of Nerdio, and what do we support as a software company? And then what is it that we kind of expect you to work with Microsoft on, or maybe kind of troubleshoot on your own, right? And so we've got kind of a good graphical demonstration of our support scope and the different things we can help you with here. So that kind of concludes the overall of my presentation. I wanted to make sure that I provided a good amount of time for Q&A. So obviously I can get into some of these details a little bit more, but just wanted to kind of open the floor for some of the Q&A session here and start walking through those questions.
Great, Christopher. Of course, you will hear more from our partners and from our team. We have a couple of questions here.
Awesome.
Yes, so let's start with the questions related to WVD.
Okay.
The first one says, can we increase the virtual desktops?
Yes, you can. Yeah. And I'm guessing what you mean is adding adjusting maybe the VM size of the virtual desktops. And I can just, because I'm screen sharing already, I'll just show you, that would be in the servers tab here. If you said, hey, our virtual desktop for maybe the pools, right? You want to adjust the virtual desktop size of the that's allocated for each user, right? You just come back here into the pools, and I'm going kind of fast, but basically you go to the servers tab, you say manage hosts, and you'd select this pencil here, right? And so what it's going to do is say, okay, currently you're at a D2 SV3. If you remember from our quote, we went ahead and sized these at a E4 SV3. Right, and so you would specify the E4 here. That's going to be the 4-core, 32 gigs of memory. This is actually an E4 DV4. This is Microsoft's new and improved series size, but you could specify that however you wanted. push confirm, and that will actually size up the environment for users on their desktops. And then the other way you could do that is by going here to the users tab, and this would be on the dedicated desktop side, right? So if you assign a user their own dedicated desktop, you'd come here, you'd select that user, and you'd make the change on the user. And you probably actually just saw this, so I won't go through that just because I just went through that, but that would be how it's done in both cases.
Very good. And the next question is related to WVD as well.
Okay.
So they are asking if we can administer WVD with Nerdio. Yes, we can. And if we can add users and delete users.
Yes.
Similar to the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you basically, go here. I'll just show you real quick. Go to the users tab. You would, if you want to add users, you can say add new here, or you can scroll to the bottom and say add user here. And then let's say, a user, maybe this Andy IT guy, he's leaving, right? We go ahead and select the drop down, say delete user. It's going to delete this user, release any type of licensing that was assigned, remove his desktop assignment. And this is all done automated through Nerdio, right? And something else I'll mention that's kind of important to recognize, the Nerdio automation piece, if you kind of broke us down to like what is Nerdio, right? We are basically PowerShell with a fancy face. So a lot of partners say, hey, I actually know how to do this on the Azure backend. And we say, hey, that's great. If you want to write the PowerShell code and do this yourself, you totally can. We just help to automate that. So, tasks like deleting a user, right? You could do this here. It'll automate it, take just a few minutes, or you could go to the Azure backend, manually remove, this user, unassign them from the resources, then jump to the Office portal, remove them, unassign the licensing and things like that. But essentially, deleting a user and then adding an additional user would be done through, adding here or selecting the drop down to delete the user there.
Very good. The next question says, can we see what users are connected in a WVD environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way you would do that is if I jumped back to the servers tab here and then scroll down to the pools. So, you can see in this environment, this test environment, we have a lot of different pools provisioned, and we've got a bunch of different users assigned. But essentially, once this finishes loading, you could see the total number of users assigned to this pool right here. Or what you could do is you could say, okay, we're going to go ahead and select manage hosts, right? And then, it'll take a second to pull the information from the database here. But essentially what we could do is select this users. And what you'd see is all the users logged on to just this individual host. So if you had 4 or 5 hosts, you'd see those all listed down here. You'd select the users on this host. And then what you could also do is initially this will show active users. So, if you logged on, for instance, and you looked at Task Manager, it would be signed in users who are working. But we all know oftentimes users like to just disconnect for the day, right? They'll go to the top, push the exit button, and technically it's not an active session, so it won't show up here, but they will still be in the environment. They'll actually still be on the host consuming resources. So what you can do is select this gear, and you can turn show active users off. And what that'll do is it'll actually list all inactive users as well, all users with disconnected sessions. So, this is beneficial, especially for troubleshooting, or if you're about to maybe push an update. If you jump back here and you just looked at the active users, you might say, hey, there's 3 users on. But if you show and toggle to the disconnected users as well, you might see there's actually 9 users currently accessing this pool or this session host rather than the 4 that it seems that have active sessions logged in.
Good. So now we are going to see some questions related more to infrastructure.
Okay.
Can we migrate SAP HANA on-premise to Microsoft Azure with Nerdio?
So that's a good question. Generally, it depends on the route you go. So if you want to use the data mirroring job, you definitely can mirror kind of individual files and folders. If you wanted to do the leverage the Azure Migrate tool, or maybe Azure Site Recovery, that sits actually outside of Nerdio. So I'm not as familiar with kind of the full scope of that, but what we found is, there are hundreds and hundreds of different migration options and different paths you can choose for that route, and that's something directly with Microsoft. From a Nerdio perspective, all you'd have to make sure to do is place that virtual machine in the correct resource group that this environment provisioned in. So by default, it's called like Nerdio RG. you would set up the Azure Migrate job, you would migrate that server over, and then you'd place it in the Nerdio RG resource group. And then what you would see is, if you go back to the servers tab, you would see that server listed here, that additional server listed here once you're done. So, from a migration standpoint, I'm not sure about that specifically, but I do know that the Azure Migrate piece is pretty robust. And that if you wanted to build it manually and then just use the data mirroring job to move the specific data, files, and folders, you could go that route as well.
Very good. The next question is, can we use Nerdio to migrate VMs? Oh, I guess it's VMware VMs to Azure?
Yeah, I mean, the similar response for that question. I would say if you're going to migrate the entire VM, just use the Azure Migrate job, and I'd have to pull up a list of the full compatibilities there. But you can migrate VMs as well as physical servers. So if you've got maybe like a Hyper-V or a vSphere VMware configuration, currently, or maybe you're in another data center, maybe Azure's data center or Google's data center, right? Azure Migrate integrates there as well. And so you can actually migrate the server, an existing virtual machine from an existing, data center. Either it could even be private cloud, for instance, right? You could migrate that over and then place that in the new, Azure subscription and then Azure resource group.
Good, thank you. Okay, so the next one is, can we implement Microsoft Azure backup with Nerdio?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's basically what the backup and DR section covers is, you'd go in here, you do backup and DR, and in the Azure backend, I mean, again, kind of the Nerdio management piece, everything behind the scenes here is a look at Azure. So, it's kind of probably good for me to clarify as well. Let's say that down the road you said, what, this has been a great run with Nerdio, but we want to, move away from the solution for whatever reason, right? You have two options. Option one would be remove just the Nerdio management piece, and you could continue to administer all of the Azure resources on the back end, right? So you don't want us to remove any of the actual infrastructure, just the management piece. If you did that, in essence, everything would still exist on the Azure backbone, right? So all of this backups, everything here, what you're looking at is actually a look into the Azure Backup Recovery Service. You've got a backup recovery vault, you've got backup policies. Everything here is looking, you could log into portal.azure.com and navigate down to the backup section, and you could see all these servers listed here. You could see, all of these different restore points and, all the different, retentions snapshots that were created, right? You would see those in Azure. And in effect, again, you could remove the Nerdio solution. The other option would be, hey, we want to, move away altogether, and maybe you lost the opportunity, right? And you say, hey, this has been a great run so far. We've got a few more coming up, but this specific opportunity we're going to walk away from. And so in that case, you could remove the infrastructure in Azure and then also anything in the Office tenant that was created. And our goal, and this is kind of the vision of our CEO and the leadership here, is we want to earn your business every day. So, we're not going to keep you in and say, hey, if you provision with Nerdio, you're stuck with us. You'd have to go build everything from scratch. Not at all. If you provision with Nerdio, we want to continue providing you value every day, and we want you to stay with us because you like the solution and the offering, not because we locked you into, leveraging our solution. So I know that kind of went a little bit outside of the scope of the question, but just wanted to clarify just for kind of an overall understanding.
And that's great, because I have someone clarifying the question, that it's more related to Azure Backup Server, which is on-premise.
Okay.
Does it make any difference?
It shouldn't. So if I understand, you're saying, could you use Azure to back up servers on-prem? Is that the question?
Yes. The question is if they can use Nerdio to implement the Azure Backup Server.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you couldn't necessarily use Nerdio specifically for that, but that is something you would use. Azure Site Recovery, we see a lot of partners do that. And basically what you would do is, you would set up that job. I think you provision like an additional resource group, and then you would you'd actually use the ASR service to back up the on-prem, and then you would use that as kind of a failover, right? So if for whatever reason the on-prem server went down, you know you have a perfect backup of that in the cloud. Most of the time you have a VPN connection already set up, and you'd be, you know, up and running in the cloud without even a skip or a bump in the road, basically.
Awesome, that's great.
Yeah.
Another question, can we change the Azure subscription?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit, it's actually not too bad. We have partners, I wouldn't say who do it all the time, but you know, I've seen it done several times. Basically what that includes is you'd initially provision, right, in a specific subscription. You would actually move, or maybe, you know, the CSP in this case, like Intcomex, they would move the resources themselves. And then what you do is you'd contact us and say, hey, we changed the subscription, you know, just go ahead and go to the backend and make your database association. Because a lot of what we're doing with the Nerdio management piece is we're tying into like subscription IDs and tenant information. So you can make the change, but if you move the resources to another subscription, there's no way for our automation to see that unless you tell us. And so in effect, what it would do is it would stop the Nerdio management piece until you provided us with the information of the new subscription. We would go to the backend, make that change, and then you'd be up and running as if nothing happened. So generally what we find is, you know, we say, hey, go ahead and reach out to us. So let's schedule it 24 hours in advance for a specific time, so we know, hey, we've got the right resources on deck and you guys do as well. You know, generally it's maybe over the course of a 1 or 2 hour period, the resources are moved, you let us know, we make the backend database change, and you're up and running without an issue.
Good. Next question, can we install applications in virtual desktop with Nerdio after we implement WVD?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what that would look like is you would go here to the servers tab and you would log on to the template. You'd make all of your changes on the physical template of the pool. And then what you would do is once those template changes have been made, the users would log in and they would see those changes made on the session host. So what that would look like is, you know, for instance, here in pool A, you would go to power on and modify. You would back up here to the servers tab. You would RDP into this domain controller, right? And then what you would do is you would log on to the IP address here, right? So from the domain controller itself, you'd RDP to 10.125.0.6. At that point, you're on this template, right? You're on the template, you're able to make changes, install applications. So you could install Office, you could install line of business applications, you know, any other software that's required for this environment. Once that's done, you power off and set as image, and then you push that update to the session host in the pool. And if you remember, this right here is the session host that users are logging into when they go to access their Windows Virtual Desktop. So they log into this session host, and then what they'll do is after you've ran that update to the session host, they will see those additional applications on their desktop in their environment, right? So maybe it's you updated Office, or maybe you installed 2 new applications, right? They'll log in, they'll see those 2 new applications, and they'll work, and they'll be able to, you know, appreciate those changes after you've made them.
Good. More questions.
All right, this is great.
We have many questions.
Okay.
What are some of the other Azure workloads or services that can be deployed and managed by the Nerdio platform?
So primarily we see 3 different types of three ways that Nerdio is leveraged. So by default, you know, the one we see most partners leverage is Windows Virtual Desktop, which is kind of what we've went through today. The other option would be the typical RDS environment, right? And obviously that's going to look different. You'd get provisioned with a RD gateway, a connection broker. You'd be leveraging collections rather than pools. And, you know, you're on basically, you know, server 2012, server 2016, rather than Windows 10 native with WVD. So those are the primary 2. The other one is our core offering, and core is kind of our infrastructure as a solution. And what we see partners leverage there is, you know, let's say you don't need Windows Virtual Desktops, but you're also not terribly familiar with Azure and you just want to build out the infrastructure. And I mean, the other time we would see partners use this as kind of like a foot in the door, if you will. They say, okay, our client is not ready to fully adopt WVD and fully adopt Azure, but they need to refresh some of their servers. So because they've got 4 on-prem servers that are end of life, let's load those up into Azure with the Nerdio for core. And I'll jump back and show you as I'm talking. But basically what that would look like is, again, just the actual infrastructure. So right here, core heart is our Nerdio for core deployment. So by default, it just has a domain controller. You would load up the additional servers into this environment. And so, yeah, you can see it's very simple. There's no pools, there's no, golden image or anything like that. It's just this domain controller. You'd load up those additional servers, you'd set up a site-to-site VPN connection, and you'd be off and running, right? And so it's just the infrastructure. You can do some basic user management. So, you could go here, you could access these users, maybe reset passwords, adjust what Active Directory groups they're a part of, all that, add additional users. So there's still some user management side of things, but primarily it's just the infrastructure. Then maybe it's been 6 months and the client says, hey, actually, we're ready to start looking at maybe going to Windows Virtual Desktop. With Nerdio, it's very simple. All you do is you drop out, you go to this core account and you say, great, they're ready to go WVD. Let's go ahead and upgrade this account to Enterprise. You'd push upgrade, it unlocks all the Windows Virtual Desktop features and functionalities, and you'd be off and running there. So, core is a good offering, especially if, again, partners aren't ready to fully adopt the cloud solution, but you still want to get their foot in the door with the cloud and start, moving to the cloud just for the added redundancy and security.
Awesome. Next question. If I want to use another type of file server, like Azure Files or Blob, with Nerdio, is it possible?
That's an excellent question. Actually, our development team is actively working on that. Azure Files is, I believe, still in public preview. They're still working out a few kinks with it, and our development team is working closely with the Microsoft team as they build that out. Our goal is to actually begin moving toward Azure Files and do away with the file server altogether. That's probably something you'll see here in the next maybe 6 to 8 months as we continue to build out the solution. But that is definitely something that we're working on, and we'll have full integration with that as Microsoft continues to develop that.
Cool. I remember a similar question from the session yesterday. Mm-hmm. If I want to use Windows 10 32-bit, does it work?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, you can use 32-bit in Azure if you'd like. By default, Nerdio provisions with 64-bit. So that would be something that would be a little bit more on the manually on the Azure backend, but that's definitely something that you should be able to do.
Very good. For FS Logics with WVD, do we need FX Logics licenses?
No, you don't. Yeah. So most of the time, what you'll find is if you're doing kind of like a pay-as-you-go, most of the licensing for the servers themselves are bundled in. So, the OS license and things like that. If you want to purchase Azure Hybrid Benefits for the OS license, you can. But from like an FS Logic standpoint, there's really no additional licensing needed for that. The users are licensed because they have Windows 10 Enterprise for their desktop. So by just kind of the nature of the way Microsoft has it designed, it's pretty robust already. But yeah, you don't need any additional licensing for FS Logics.
Very good. And the last question, what happens if the customer already has a data center or DC in Azure and wants to use WVD? Excellent
question. Yeah. So with Nerdio, because of kind of the complexity of some of our scripts and our orchestration, as I'm sure you guys can see, it's not really possible for us to layer on the Nerdio management piece to an existing resource group and existing Azure resources. So there's 2 ways we see partners normally approach this. The first option would be, or the first method would be to provision the Nerdio resource group next to the existing resource group in Azure, and then either migrate everything over. So, Nerdio, you can see provisions with the domain controller. They say, hey, we're going to go ahead and migrate the group policies. We'll migrate any servers, maybe with like Azure Migrate or just moving. You can migrate those to the new resource group and use the Nerdio management piece. The other option would be, hey, maybe they've put a lot of work and a lot of effort into the existing environment. They don't really want to do away with it. So then they just set up maybe like a VNet peering connection, make sure there's good connection between both sides, run the WVD side through the Nerdio resource group, and leave the current infrastructure in place.
Very good. Uh, we have two more questions.
All right.
And we still have time, so let's do it.
Yep, let's do it.
Okay. So, has Nerdio been used to migrate a client and data center into Azure, and what would that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So migrating, and when you say data center, I'm guessing like, maybe an existing on-prem like server 2016 or 2019 data center. But it could also be like maybe a SQL data center. You can migrate either the existing server as is using something like Azure Migrate if there's too much configuration that's been placed into that, or you can migrate the data using something like maybe data mirroring or some other third-party applications, and then load that up to an Azure server that you've built from scratch, and then you could run the data center in Azure. So if the question's more from a SQL standpoint, there's kind of two ways we see that done. You could also run, and it's one of the benefits too of kind of more of a group lift and shift or a greenfield deployment is, if you could run the data center in Azure, maybe migrate the database as like a quick snapshot and then test it for a while and then say, okay, this is great. We're going to actually migrate. We're going to refresh the database in Azure over the weekend. And then starting Monday, users will use the, Azure data center as the authority. They'll go ahead and do that over the weekend, and starting Monday, Azure's the authority. So we've worked with partners who have done database migrations and data center migrations, and so far they've worked really well.
Very good. I have another question. Can we implement SQL always on with Nerdio? Is that possible?
Do you say SQL always on?
Yes, SQL always on.
I'm not totally sure. I believe so, but I'd have to double check on that. I'm not as familiar yet with that side.
Okay,
but yeah,
don't
good
worry.
question.
That was an internal question.
Okay.
Okay. So earlier, did you make a distinction between Office 365 and Microsoft 365 in respect of getting access to Windows 10 licenses?
Yeah, absolutely. So Office 365 unfortunately does not come with the Windows 10 license. So like Office 365 E3, E5. So you'd need additional licensing. I know currently Microsoft is kind of merging some of like the old Office 365 and then M365. So the exact, current terminology is a little bit convoluted, but in essence, if you remember one thing, just remember that to license or to access Windows Virtual Desktop, you need a Windows 10 license. That's basically all that Microsoft requires. So you can either purchase that through Windows 10 Direct or through an existing bundled license that has Windows 10 included. So if you're not sure, if you say, hey, I've got the old Office that's now like M365 Basic or Standard, or I've got Office E3 or whatever you're running right now. If you check if Windows 10 is included in that, you're good to go. If it's not, then you might want to upgrade to like M365 Business Premium, or possibly just purchase, a direct Windows 10 license. I think they're like $7 a pop or something like that. So they're not too bad.
Very good. And that was the real last question.
All right.
But can you summarize, very brief, what would be the value for the MSPs that are here in this session and also participate yesterday in our commercial session? What would be the value for them to use Nerdio?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll try to summarize it in just a few minutes here, but I would say from an overall encompassing standpoint, Nerdio empowers an MSP who maybe doesn't have the background in Azure or the technical staff to move toward the cloud space, and it empowers them to not only price out and effectively quote these opportunities, but have their tier 1 or tier 2 technicians fully deploy and support very, very high level complex Azure environments with just a few clicks, right? So there's cost savings on training, it automates the process, it streamlines it, and it allows MSPs, again, with very little Azure experience to have strong, robust, and authoritative Azure practices and cloud solutions.
Awesome. And like a TV program just in time.
All right.
Yes, we did it in 2 hours.
Yep.
So we cover everything. I'm pretty sure that we have more questions. So that's the idea of this bootcamp. So we can show the value of Nerdio to our MSPs in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much, Christopher, for all your information, all your knowledge. So, of course, you will hear more from our region in the near future.
Sounds great. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You're very welcome. And thank you, Pete Langas, also. He's here with us as well. For all the partners connected, please, I provide my email address in case you have any questions, you want to learn more about Nerdio, just send me an email and we can coordinate with Nerdio and with our pre-sales engineer team so we can help you and identify the opportunities, and we can do one-on-one sessions with you. So thank you all and have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.